our countries cannot afford the burden of NCDs. This is a double burden of disease, and this is a burden of disease that we just cannot afford. We cannot afford the illness that comes from diabetes or from all the other diseases which are linked today very much to lifestyle and food. And food is clearly indicted as being part of the problem. The problem is that the food we eat today is no longer in our hands. The food we eat today is today in the hands of very large food corporations. And which is why it is, governments actually are struggling all over the world to try and give the right message and to regulate and to inform consumers that the food that we eat, we need to know how good it is for our health and how bad it is for our health. How much salt, how much sugar, and how much fat is actually bad for you. The consumers have the right to know, and that government must come up with what is now known so well as front-of-pack labeling, which would allow consumers to have the choice, the knowledge to be able to decide.
So what is perhaps leading to this? Part of this could be attributed to the fast-changing food habits with fast foods and junk foods. India clearly is experiencing a dietary shift, increasingly consuming more processed foods, more ultra-processed foods, both packaged food as well as fast foods, and these are all linked with the double burden. We all know ultra-processed foods, which we call junk foods as well, are more of factory products and less of food. So they essentially are far from contributing to a balanced diet.
This tripling in 15, 20 years. Here you can see it for sugary beverages, both fruit drinks and carbonated beverages. And you can see this kind of an increase, almost a fourfold increase in this 13-year period. This is what's going to be the future of India.
Front-of-pack labeling, on the other hand, has come across as more consumer-friendly version. It's easily noticeable. It's at the front of the pack. It's better understood, known to be better understood. It known to enable quicker and informed choice by consumer, and can encourage healthy eating habits in the long term. So essentially what we would like to summarize here is that 7 years of delay, several committees and groups, many dilutions, and the industry pressure continues, and the FOP labeling still awaited. You could see that it started with the expert committee in March 2013. Then another committee, which was set up in 2015, gave its recommendations in 2017, basically endorsed the recommendations given by the 2013 committee. In April 2018, FSSAI comes up with a labeling and display regulation, and which requires declaration of salt, of course, and proposes, most importantly, first time front of pack labeling for calorie, total fat, total sugar, trans fat, and salt. In August 2018, Based on the industry pressure, industry push, FSSAI again sets up a panel, which is led by B. Sasikaran, who is a former director of the National Institute of Nutrition, to review the draft regulations. But unfortunately, the committee's suggestions were not made public. But what we know is that in July 2019, FSSAI issued another draft regulation, a modified version, but a very diluted version of FOP labeling. So what happened? Total fat became saturated fat, salt became sodium, total sugar became added sugar, and the RD of added sugar was kept same as of total sugar. Sometime in December 2019, immediately after a couple of months after that draft, because we could see that there's a big problem going on, we tested for salt and fat in popular packaged foods as well as fast foods, and came up with a study. Essentially, we could clearly figure out that most of what the children gets to eat is very, very high and should be labeled red, of course, based on the FSSAI proposed thresholds of 2018, which were actually based on the WHO CRO model, nutrient profiling model. Immediately after the study, the FSSAI in December 2019 says that they need to now delink the FOP from labeling regulations, and they need to revise the thresholds, which were actually proposed by them in 2018 as well as 2019 after several committees. In December 20, we now see another notification which of labeling and display regulations, and the FOP labeling is not part of it. But the good part here is that the nutrition fact labeling is much more strengthened. For the first time, we have sodium as a mandatory condition to be labeled at the back of the pack. And the FSSAI now, since January 2021, is conducting discussions with stakeholders based on a study which it got done in 2020, and parallel working group is also operational on the FOP label.
Non-communicable diseases have encroached at such a young age that even 5 to 9 years children and 10 to 19 years children are all having evidences of NCDs. As many as 1 in 10 school-age children and adolescents are pre-diabetic, that is HbA1c more than 5.7. 1% of the school-age children were already diabetic. 3% of school-age children and 4% had total cholesterol much more than normal. 1/4 of them had HDL, that is good cholesterol, which is lower than normal. 1/3 of them had hypertriglyceridemia. Then 7% of these children are already having some form of the renal damage, which is already settled in. And 5% of these adolescents are already having hypertension.
Strong warning labels on tobacco, not just in India, but in the entire South Asia region. So what we found, from just as Philip Morris and BAT play from the same playbook of arguments on tobacco, you actually have the same arguments which are being used by the multinational food industry as well as the domestic food industry. So one of the biggest arguments they use is FOPL is not an effective solution to public health. But the reality is, then why are they fighting it? Why are they putting in billions of dollars to fight it? That FOPL is not a magic bullet, but along with a package of policies like taxes and marketing regulations, it proves to be really effective.
We need an effective warning label, which is simple and interpretive label, which needs to be there as front of the pack. Today, the best experience in the world is a warning label. So that's something that we need to be very clear about. Secondly, what we have learned is that it has to be mandatory. this voluntary and, do it if you can, that doesn't work out. Thirdly, what is very clear is that the thresholds, we can reinvent the thresholds, but we have a base to start with, which is WHO CRO thresholds. We do not need a graded implementation plan because it's impossible to do so. We need to do it. We need to do it now. Today, the data is very clear. It's not only even obesity, it's overweight people are more susceptible to COVID-19. Overweight is a problem, and overweight is linked to the food we eat. It is very clear industry will fight, but it is also clear that we have the power of truth, we have the power of knowledge, and we have the power of societal imperative.